Why does the left celebrate white people becoming a minority in their own countries, yet call you a racist the moment you point it out? Why is it perfectly acceptable to speak openly about the majority becoming a minority with barely concealed euphoria, but the instant you raise it as a concern, you're branded a white supremacist? And why do progressive protests look less like genuine solidarity with immigrants and more like elaborate performances of self-congratulation? Who is really at the center of those marches? The vulnerable migrants themselves or the people holding the signs? Today, we're going to hear from one of the sharpest, most courageous, and most uncomfortable voices in the English-speaking world, novelist and essayist Lionel Shriver, a woman who doesn't speak from the comfort of ideological consensus, but from honest and sometimes brutal observation of reality. Her novels have won the Booker Prize, her essays have detonated scandals at literary festivals, and her interviews have made people walk off set in real time. She is not a lifelong conservative. She grew up in a liberal family, voted Democrat for years, and actively participated in anti-Vietnam War protests. She is someone who changed her positions as reality collided with her beliefs, and that, precisely, is what makes her voice so difficult to dismiss. Shriver grew up in a classic liberal Democrat family in the United States. As a teenager, she was an active anti-war protester, the archetypal young progressive American of the 1970s, committed, idealistic, genuinely convinced that activism could change the world. But everything changed when she moved to Northern Ireland in 1987. There, she developed a deep revulsion toward the IRA. She said she hated them on sight, not out of abstract prejudice, but because of their repulsive rhetoric and the way they used violence to justify causes she considered entirely disproportionate. Witnessing firsthand how political terrorism can be romanticized into heroic narrative was a turning point in her worldview. She also distanced herself from her own father when he opposed Bill Clinton's welfare reforms. Shriver saw those reforms as profoundly positive, policies that incentivized work and personal responsibility instead of perpetuating state dependency. In her view, the contemporary left's so-called politics of compassion doesn't actually help the vulnerable. It keeps them vulnerable. That is not compassion. That is control. For Shriver, many of today's progressive protests are not acts of genuine solidarity. They are pure performance, political theater, and personal vanity dressed up as empathy. She points to anti-ICE protests as a prime example. The protesters, she argues, are performing guilt rather than actually feeling it. The megaphone, the placard, the hashtag, the social media photo, none of that is help. It is spectacle. They cast themselves as the moral heroes of the story, while the real immigrants, the ones who are genuinely suffering, are reduced to mere extras in the protesters' personal drama. If they truly felt deep shame or genuine guilt, she says, they would stay home and reflect in silence. What they actually display is righteous anger that delivers a rush of moral superiority. It is ego wrapped in altruism. And Shriver has no hesitation in saying it plainly. Most of them are not there for the immigrants. They are there for themselves. Shriver is blunt about what is often called the Great Replacement. She does not regard it as a conspiracy secretly orchestrated by some shadowy elite. She sees it as an inevitable demographic fact, the product of concrete, observable decisions, falling birth rates, aging populations, and mass immigration policies. Her argument is simple and brutal. If we are not willing to give birth to and raise the next generation, others will take our place, and we will have earned it. What outrages her most is the left's breathtaking hypocrisy. On the one hand, they call you a racist for observing that white populations are becoming minorities. On the other, they celebrate that exact same trend, declaring it a victory. This, she says, is speaking out of both sides of your mouth simultaneously. If the topic is taboo and racist, why are you celebrating it? And if you're celebrating it, why is it racist to acknowledge it? The contradiction is so glaring that it can only survive under the enforced silence of political correctness. Shriver fully endorses the controversial statement made by businessman Sir Jim Ratcliffe. Of course, the United Kingdom has been colonized. She explains, If you transported thousands of British people to another country and fundamentally altered its demographics and culture, that would be called colonization, settler colonialism, to use the left's own preferred vocabulary. But when the same process happens in reverse, when it is Britain undergoing that transformation, the left categorically forbids use of the same word. For Shriver, this is not an intellectual nuance. It is a dishonest game of words whose sole purpose is to make the debate unthinkable, to silence anyone who raises it, and to turn a legitimate question into a moral taboo. For the progressive left, immigration is not simply another policy debate. It is a matter of absolute moral principle. It activates every one of their most cherished buttons: race, income inequality, and victimized groups. It also has the perfect architecture of woke ideology. It casts the white majority as the profane, contaminating, inherently guilty element, and elevates minorities to a sacred status, whose mere presence sanctifies any cause. It is the third rail, the untouchable subject, that generates the most visceral fury when anyone dares to question it. Shriver observes that today's progressives have essentially rejected the entire concept of the nation-state. They feel no genuine attachment to their country. They derive no sense of meaning or belonging from their nationality, except in the negative. Their national identity exists solely as something to be ashamed of, to apologize for, never to celebrate or defend. This creates an existential void at the core of their ideology, one that makes them profoundly unhappy, anxious, and resentful. And that resentment is directed precisely at those who do feel a genuine attachment to their nation, at those who are not ashamed of their cultural heritage. The quiet patriot becomes the enemy to be destroyed. White guilt, Shriver argues, is almost always performative. They act out guilt rather than genuinely feeling it. They see themselves as white saviors, something they ferociously condemn in fiction, while practicing it without embarrassment in real life. Shriver summarizes it with a phrase that cuts like a scalpel. It is pure narcissism. Hating your fellow countrymen who don't share your worldview in the name of hating yourself. It is the most sophisticated and socially acceptable way of feeling superior while appearing not to. Self-flagellation as the new form of pride. At its core, Shriver is telling us something very simple. Performative virtue is not virtue. It is theater. And theater, no matter how well staged, solves no real problems. Shriver is scathing about how contemporary culture has degraded motherhood. It is now seen as a low-prestige fallback, something you resort to when you have nothing more important to do with your time. Many progressive women delay having children, reassuring themselves that there's always time, that IVF will always be an option. Then they discover that biology does not negotiate with ideological timelines. IVF is expensive, emotionally grueling, and statistically far less successful than popular culture suggests. The promise of "there's always time" turns out, far too often, to be a comfortable lie. In Israel, large families are admired. In the West, by contrast, having more than 3 children is considered eccentric, old-fashioned, or even environmentally irresponsible. Large-scale motherhood has gone from being a cultural value to being treated as a suspicious eccentricity. And that cultural inversion has demographic consequences that cannot be wished away. The consequence is stark. If we do not raise our own next generation, others will take our place, and we will have deserved it. Progressives are dismantling the social norms and shared boundaries that hold communities together. Without clear norms to structure communal life, what remains is a landscape of disconnected individuals, unable to relate to one another in any coherent or meaningful way. Radical individualism does not deliver freedom. It delivers depression, anxiety, and a profound existential emptiness. Radical individualism promises absolute freedom, but delivers absolute loneliness. And chronic loneliness is now one of the leading drivers of depression, anxiety, and the collapse of meaning across the Western world. The left celebrates what amounts to colonization in reverse, while prohibiting anyone from calling it by that name. Lionel Shriver is not afraid to say it out loud. If we do not defend our culture, our borders, and our willingness to bring the next generation into the world, others will take our place. And according to her, we will have deserved it. Because civilizational decline does not always arrive by force. Sometimes it arrives because a civilization decides, consciously or not, to stop reproducing, to stop believing in itself, and to stop defending what it once considered worth defending. If this video made you think, hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe so you don't miss any future analysis. Want us to go deeper on any specific topic? Leave it in the comments. There is much more to explore. Shriver's ideas on the collapse of the middle class, on canceled literary fiction, on what feminism actually means today. Any of that could be the next video, if you ask for it.